what you want is for the B side, you want the the right side up, so the right side of the fabric up, because that will be the outside. And for the A side, the front of the mask, you want the back side of the fabric facing upwards, and you want the short edge at the top for each. And what we're going to do is measure about a 1/2 inch. Actually, let's measure a 1/2 inch. I usually just mark it with a pencil, and you're going to fold it over and iron it, and then you're going to mark another 1/2 inch and fold it over again. You're going to get one of those nice seams again, and we're going to stitch that up. And we're going to do that on both the A and the B side. So here we have our two cutouts side by side. You can see the one for the front is a little bit longer at the top, and that's because we have to make a pocket, so that gets folded over. So now what we're ready to do is attach the ties. We're going to be attaching them to this, or spacing them on the front fabric. But before we do that, so you've got the seam, like the rough edge seam side here, we're going to turn it over so that the nice side, or the good side of the front of the mask, is up. And we're going to attach our ties so the rough edge of the tie is flush with the rough edge of the fabric, and so that we leave, you'll feel the seam here is about a 1/2 inch, this is about a 1/2 inch, and we're going to leave a 1/2 inch space of just a single layer of fabric between, and then we fold this layer over top so that the tie is actually sitting in a bit of a hole between the two, and we're going to pin it there. Make sure when you're putting your tie into that it's facing inward toward the center of the fabric, and we're going to do the same thing on the other side. And then at the bottom here, we're going to do the same thing without folding the fabric over, obviously, but so we're going to place the ties at the bottom about a 1/2 inch off the bottom. So I've pinned all 4 of the ties. There's about a 1/2 inch there off the bottom. Rough edge is flush with the rough edge of the fabric. And up here you can see them, they're tucked underneath this. So what we want to do is we're going to pin both sides of the mask together now. So we want to gather up our ties and put them in the middle. And then what we're going to do is take this piece, the back piece, we're going to overlay it on top of this to make sure that the bottom edges and the sides are lined up. There's going to be a slight space at the top here, and that's just where the pocket is going to be, so don't worry about that. It shouldn't be even. Just make sure when I'm going to pin around the outside, but just make sure that you give yourself about a 1/4 inch here, or no, pardon me, a 1/2 inch, so that, because we're going to sew all the way around the edge. Okay, so I'll just go ahead and pin it. So I went ahead and stitched it together, and you can see both sides of the mask now. We have the back side of the fabric facing out, and the good side of the fabric facing out on the B side. You can see inside there, you've got your pocket. All the ties are gathered in the middle, and I've made sure that they're not sitting within the seam allowance that I'm going to sew. So right now what we're going to do is we're going to sew along the sides and the bottom about 1/4 to a 1/2 inch, just a regular sewing stitch. Don't sew across the top though, because we need to leave that open for the pocket. So I'm going to go ahead and sew that up. And just watch out for your sewing machine. It gets quite thick where the bands, where the seams and the folds sit and the ties sit. So take it easy on your machine, because you don't want to break a needle or something. So I finished stitching around the outside. You can see it, see the stitch there. It doesn't have to be perfect, and it doesn't have to be exactly, where I have it, just as long as the ties and the edges are closed and the ties are secure in there. And so what we do now is we just turn the whole thing inside out. And there's a few pins in there we'll take out. And then push the corners out as best you can. So there, now you can see the mask is starting to look like a mask, and here's the little pocket fold there, and that's where your filter goes. Now, the next thing we have to do is create pleats on this, and I'll show you how to do that. So for this part, I just take a pencil to mark off the intervals for the pleats, mark them on both sides so that you know where to fold. Now I don't have my ruler. There we go. You want to make sure that your mask, the pocket fold is, like the opening is at the top, and that you've got the front facing you when you do your folds. So what we want to do is measure down 2 inches from the top with a ruler, and I just use a pencil to mark it, or a pin. You can use a pin too. So there you can see my little mark there. Right, and I want to do that on the other side. So I'm going to do this. I'm going to mark both sides in the intervals of the first mark is at 2 inches. The next mark is at 1.25 inches. The next mark is at 3/4. The next mark is at 1.25 inches. The next mark is at 3/4. And the final mark is at around 1.25 inches. The only thing is your final pleat can't come below the tie here. So we may have to adjust that a little bit. And I'll show you what I mean. So I'm going to go ahead and mark them, and then I'll show you how to make the pleats. So I'll do my best to show you how to do this. It's hard to film and fold and do stuff at the same time. So I have my marks down the side, 2 inches, 1.25 inch, 3/4, 1.25 inch, 3/4, 1.25 inch near the bottom. Both sides are marked. So at that first pleat, take your fingers and just take that one and connect it with that one. So just fold it over until it touches the other one. And then what we need to do is pin it. And make sure the edges are flush here. Like you want it lined up. You want it lined up properly there. So, and then you're going to do that on the other side. Just take that 2 inch line and put it on top of the line that's below it at 1.25 inches. Basically, so there you go, I'll show you again. So there's 2 inches, there's your 1.25 inch. Just tuck in the fabric there behind and bring that down there. Make sure the sides are flush. And there you have your first pleat. Your pleats should open towards the bottom. If they don't, then you've done it backwards. So hopefully that makes sense. And we pin that one. This is probably the hardest part. Okay, so you've got your first pleat. You leave the 3/4 inch space here. You want to leave that. So wherever this pleat ends, you leave a space, 3/4 inch space, and then you want to, wherever that next dash is, you want to fold that exactly the way you did here. Push back the fabric in between them and just basically connect the two lines there. Hopefully you can see this. So that you have another pleat starting. And then we're going to do that on the other side, and so on and so forth. So I'll keep showing you because this one's confusing. Okay, and then the other side, same thing. Leave that 3/4 inch space here and then fold the next line down to connect with the other, and there you can see you have your second pleat. We leave the 3/4 where the next mark is that you can see, fold that one down to the next. That's your final pleat. Should look like that when you're all finished. So once you pin that final pleat there, what you need to do is iron the front and back of the mask so it's flat, and then we're gonna do a top stitch around the outside. So I'll go ahead and iron it, and I'll be back. This is where you may want to adjust the stitch length on your sewing machine. I'm just gonna make mine a little longer, and that's because the fabric is so much thicker. You need to give more allowance for the thread to come through and just make it a little bit longer. The other thing is when you're sewing, you want to make sure that you're going with the pleats and not against, because what happens is the foot gets stuck here. Trust me, I've done this, it's no fun. It's also, this is where the fabric is very thick. You've got layers of seams and whatnot under here, plus the pleats. So just go slow around the outside, just to keep it from jamming up your machine. So here is the completed product. You can see I stitched around the outside. It took me forever because I kept losing my pleats, so that's kind of a difficult part. You flip it around, you can see the pleats are at the back and your pocket is at the top. So anyway, yeah, and then it just goes over your face like that. And tie the corners, and I don't know how to tie it, but I'm sure it says online how to properly tie your mask.